The untold South remembers the men who carried freedom like a burning torch through some of the darkest corners of American history. Their stories are not always comfortable, and they are rarely simple. But they are real. They are human. And they remind us that courage often rises from ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice as the final word. Today, we honor two figures whose missions, sacrifices, and legacies shaped the spirit of resistance in ways that still echo across generations. One was a white abolitionist who believed that slavery was a sin so deep it demanded action. The other was a black freedom fighter whose love for his family pushed him into the heart of danger. Together, their stories form a single flame, a flame we call freedom's fire. John Brown was born in 1800, in a time when America was still defining its soul. From his earliest years, he saw the cruelty of slavery not as distant news but as a wound in the nation's heart. He watched enslaved families torn apart, heard stories of men and women hunted like animals, and decided that silence was complicity. Brown's faith ran deep. He believed that God demanded justice, not patience. He raised his children to see all people as equal before heaven, and he taught them that freedom was not a privilege but a divine right. As he grew older, Brown's conviction hardened into action. He became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, guiding fugitives through the night toward safety. He armed himself not for conquest but for protection, standing guard over homes threatened by slave catchers. In Kansas, when pro-slavery forces terrorized abolitionist settlers, Brown fought back. He led small bands of men who defended free towns, earning a reputation as both hero and outlaw. To his enemies, he was dangerous. To those he saved, he was deliverance. Brown's life was a storm of faith and fire. He believed that moral persuasion had failed, that speeches and petitions could not end a system built on chains. He saw the hypocrisy of a nation that called itself free while millions were enslaved. And so he prepared for something greater, a strike against the very machinery of bondage. His eyes were fixed on a single goal, to awaken America's conscience through action. John Brown was not a man seeking fame or fortune. He was a man seeking redemption for a country that had lost its way. His courage was not reckless, it was righteous. His mission was not vengeance, it was liberation. And as history would soon reveal, his conviction would ignite a fire that no gallows could extinguish. By the fall of 1859, John Brown believed the time for waiting had passed. Decades of petitions, speeches, and political compromises had done nothing to loosen the chains of slavery. Brown saw a nation drifting toward moral collapse, and he felt called, almost commanded, to strike at the heart of the system. His plan was bold, dangerous, and unlike anything America had ever seen. He would seize the federal armory at Harpers Ferry, arm enslaved men, and spark a movement that would sweep across the South like a rising storm. Brown knew the risks. He knew the odds. But he also knew that every great change in history begins with a spark. On the night of October 16, Brown and a small band of followers moved quietly through the darkness toward the armory. Among them were black and white men, freedmen and fugitives, farmers and laborers, all united by a single purpose. They captured the armory with almost no resistance, cutting telegraph lines and securing the grounds. For a moment, it seemed as if Brown's vision might take root. But dawn brought trouble. Local militias surrounded the armory. The townspeople armed themselves. And soon, federal troops arrived under the command of Colonel Robert E. Lee. Brown and his men were trapped. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic. Brown refused to surrender, even as his men fell around him. Dangerfield Newby was among the first killed, struck down before he could reach the freedom he fought for. Brown himself was wounded and captured. The raid had failed, but its impact was immediate and explosive. Newspapers across the country erupted with debate. Politicians condemned him. Abolitionists praised him. And enslaved people whispered his name like a promise. Brown's trial was swift, but his words during those final days carried a weight that shook the nation. He declared that he was willing to die for the cause of freedom, and that the crimes of slavery would never be washed away except with blood. On December 2, 1859, John Brown was executed. But his death did not silence him. Instead, it amplified his message. His raid on Harpers Ferry became a turning point, a moment when America could no longer ignore the violence and injustice at its core. Brown's sacrifice pushed the nation toward the Civil War, and his courage became a symbol for generations who would continue the fight for equality. Harpers Ferry was not the end of John Brown's mission. It was the beginning of his legacy. Dangerfield Newby's name may not appear in every history book, but his story carries the heartbeat of freedom itself. He was a man born into bondage, later freed, yet still chained by love and circumstance. His wife, Harriet, remained enslaved in Virginia, and her letters to him were filled with longing and fear, words that cut deeper than any blade. She wrote of the overseer's cruelty, of nights spent praying for deliverance, and of her hope that one day her husband would come for her. Those letters became Newby's compass, his reason, his weapon. When John Brown called for men to join his raid on Harper's Ferry, Newby did not hesitate. He saw in that mission a chance to rescue his family and strike a blow against the system that had stolen their lives. He was not a soldier by trade, but his courage was born of love, a love so fierce it demanded action. On the morning of the raid, he carried Harriet's letters tucked close to his heart, each word a reminder of why he fought. When the battle erupted, Newby stood beside Brown, firing into the chaos, driven by hope and desperation. But fate was cruel. He was struck down before he could reach the freedom he sought. When his body was found, those letters were still pressed against his chest, stained with blood and dust. They told the story of a man who fought not for glory, but for family, a man whose courage transcended death. Newby's sacrifice reminds us that freedom is not only a political struggle, it is a deeply personal one. It is the cry of a husband for his wife, a father for his children, a soul for its dignity. His letters became sacred relics of love and resistance, echoing through time as proof that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit refuses to surrender. The story of Dangerfield Newby did not end at Harper's Ferry. His spirit lived on, reshaped, reimagined, and reborn through generations of art and storytelling. In the decades that followed, his courage became the blueprint for a new kind of hero, the Black Avenger, the man who refused to be broken. This archetype would later echo through cinema, most famously in the figure of Django, a character forged from pain, rebellion, and redemption. Django is not just fiction, he is the embodiment of every man and woman who fought back against oppression. His chains are the same ones Newby sought to break. His fire is the same one that burned in John Brown's heart. Through film, music, and art, Django became a symbol of reclamation, a reminder that freedom is not granted, it is seized. When audiences see Django ride through the flames, they are witnessing the spirit of Dangerfield Newby resurrected. The letters pressed against Newby's chest become the bullets in Django's revolver, each one carrying the weight of history, love, and vengeance. It is the transformation of tragedy into triumph, of suffering into strength. This connection between history and art is what keeps the untold South alive. It reminds us that the fight for freedom is not confined to the past, it continues in every story told, every song sung, every image created. Django may be a legend, but his roots are real, planted in the soil of sacrifice and watered by the blood of men like Dangerfield Newby.